Tonight on Bridge City News, a restaurant in town stacked pancakes for the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen. One local pharmacist shares how he got to where he is today. And we hear from local specialists about fetal alcohol spectrum disorder.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Good evening, I'm Loris Alexander. Thank you for joining us. It was busy at the IHOP kitchen this morning, but despite that, staff at the popular restaurant made time to give back to the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen. Pancakes and sausages were served up in an important collaboration between the nonprofit organization and local restaurant.
We decided to do the soup kitchen breakfast as it helps the community and the less fortunate, and everybody needs a hand up sometimes. So we wanted to join in and donate our food and hope everybody left with a full stomach. Oh, it was fabulous. They were all so thankful and just so happy, and they all stopped me in the parking lot when I was leaving. They were just beautiful people. And Bill and his wife run it so smoothly. It's so organized. I was blown away actually with how good it was. Just the happiness that those people had just brightened my whole day. Like I was telling my kids about it and they're like, "Oh Mom, we so want to come with you next time." So they want to join in and help next time we do it.
Word gets around very quickly, and some of them said that we need to hop on over to have an IHOP breakfast. And I think some of our guests will hear names of different groups, different organizations, different companies, but they don't necessarily know who they are because they would not have the opportunity to actually have a meal at IHOP. So for us, if we can expand their horizons a little bit in terms of eating, I think it's great, especially when you have groups like that that step up and bring some of their staff early morning on a Sunday. And come and help us out. And so I think it was a real success. I guess I'd like to encourage other people to do the same. We want to kind of expand that breakfast program, and I think we'll move it to a brunch program so it's a little later. Might be easier to find people to come at that time of the day. And so I guess I'm asking people that might like to become part of that, either to sponsor a meal, possibly, or to provide a meal. And I was thinking to myself that if you had even a restaurant would do it once a month, we would need 4 restaurants and we'd have it covered. So the approach, I think, is one that highlights the needs of our guests, and that's the important thing, that we provide for their needs, and this is one great opportunity, we think, to do that.
Vishal Sakadia is no stranger to media publicity. The local pharmacist owns the medicine shop on the south side of town and has extended his hands to help his community in several ways. Today, he tells us about his humble beginnings in Lethbridge. Vishal Sakadia lost his parents at the age of 17. With only $100 to his name and a lot of support from people, he came to Canada to pursue his studies.
What I was doing is I was working as well as studying, so making just roughly around that much that we could barely just live off it.
As an international student, Sakadia could only legally work 20 hours a week, and some employers took advantage of that.
All those employers, they knew about our need, financial need. So what I got a job, like I had to work 30 hours volunteer per week, then I get 20 hours of pay. So total, I had to work like 50 hours a week.
On a shoestring budget, Sakadia lived off the very bare minimum.
I still remember I was purchasing President Choice cookies because you can get 800 gram of cookies in $1. That's what I were comparing. Like whenever I purchase something, I check how many grams is the content and how much amount it is. I wouldn't compare anything like what's the fat or whatever, because at that time it wouldn't matter.
Vishal and his wife haven't forgotten their humble beginnings. They give back with a main focus on education.
So what right now we do is we put, it is strictly, me and my wife, we put 10% of our income every month aside just for helping out people. Our main focus is to just empower the students, give money to students to help them with their education. And that's what we do here.
Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is a lifelong disability that affects the brain and body of those who were exposed to alcohol in the womb. With September being FASD Awareness Month, video journalist Naveen Day met with some local specialists to learn more about the disability.
You may see signs like this one popping up in your neighborhood this month. That is because September is to raise awareness for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Since 1999, events have been held across Canada and around the world to raise awareness.
FASD is diagnosed more than autism, Down syndrome, any other disorder combined, and it's really not given the awareness. We felt it was very important to have a month rather than just one day.
One of the challenges that comes with lack of awareness is the negative stigma that comes against birth mothers who drink. Debbie Deek with the South Alberta FASD Service Network says prevention is not as simple as telling pregnant women not to drink.
We used to think, well, gee whiz, this is easily solved. Just say to a woman you can't drink during pregnancy and there you go, problem solved. We know that that is just simply not the case. For one thing, many women often don't even know they're pregnant until after the first trimester, and that can be when there can be significant damage done to the developing fetus by a person drinking alcohol. We also know that there are many reasons why a woman may drink alcohol. For example, if she is a victim of domestic violence, if she has a partner that doesn't support her choice to be alcohol-free.
So while a father's drinking does not cause FASD, his drinking behaviors can play an important role in maternal prenatal alcohol consumption and healthy development of the baby. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
The City of Red Deer has started a pilot project called the Social Diversion Program. The goal of the program is to divert non-emergency calls away from 911 to a new call station aptly labeled 211. The planning manager for the City of Red Deer says that this new program could divert up to 5,000 calls away from 911 and free up space for more pressing calls.
So social diversion in the Red Deer context is really referring to the creation of a service delivery model for at-risk, high-need individuals that in the time of crisis would need a benefit from an intervention-based but non-emergency response. So these are typically mental health or addiction or housing-related calls, could be food security-related, but they don't necessarily need a policing enforcement nor an emergency medical like an ambulance response. So it's more of on the social and mental health wellness side.
The Social Diversion Program will begin starting November. There's been a lot of questions about the City of Lethbridge's new temporary mask bylaw, such as if you need to have a card to be exempt from wearing a face mask. As Micah Quinn explains, the city is clearing the air on the subject.
The City of Lethbridge temporary mask bylaw was passed on August 24th, and the city says they were recently made aware of bylaw exemption cards being sold online.
These cards are not from the City of Lethbridge and we do not endorse them. We are not requiring residents to show proof of their exemption at any building or retail business.
Harper says businesses in Lethbridge have to post a sign about Bylaw 6239, but they can ask the public to provide a proof of exemption verbally.
We're not requiring to provide a doctor's note or a card that says they're exempt. We're relying on people's honesty, really, to follow the intent and the spirit of the bylaw. And to state that verbally if they're asked.
The city is still encouraging education regarding the temporary mask bylaw.
Continuing to focus on education and encouraging residents to wear a mask as a way to protect those around them. Please remember to be kind, respectful, and compassionate to each other, and we will all get through this together.
For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Recapping one of our top news stories. It was busy at the IHOP kitchen this morning, but despite that, staff at the popular restaurant made time to give back to the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen. Pancakes and sausages were served up in an important collaboration between the nonprofit organization and local restaurant. And a look at weekend weather. Brace yourselves, another temperature drop is coming. Expect about 10 to 20 millimeters of rain tonight with a low of 6. That moisture will continue until noon tomorrow when we're supposed to get a high of just 8. She shot herself in the chest, died and went to hell, but Tamara LaRue says God rescued her from hell took her to heaven, all before returning her spirit to her body. She speaks with Hal Roberts about her experience. That interview is coming up next.
Many of you watching today have either experienced the tragedy of suicide in your own family or you know someone who has. Today's guest has an incredible, powerful story to share with us. Tamara LaRue is the co-founder of Life Change International and author of A Second Chance at Heaven, and she joins me now via Skype from Houston, Texas. Tamara, welcome to BCN.
Thank you, Hal. It's good to be here.
Can you briefly share your story? While still in high school, you tried to commit suicide. In reality, you should not be here with us today, right?
That's true. And anyone who has made it through high school knows that the ups and downs can be quite crazy every day in high school. And one of the things that we talk about is in my season of high school really didn't play a part, I don't believe, in my suicide. It was elongated. It was an elongated journey of feeling empty, feeling rejected over and over and over, ever since I was 4 years old, going through the brokenness of a home, going through just having a void that could not be filled. And high school certainly added to it with the ups and downs of the social acceptances. And I had a lot of friends in high school. And I was part of each group in high school. And so it was quite surprising to people because they did not know how I was silently suffering inside. And that's why I appreciate you allowing me to come on and share, because we have millions of people who are silently suffering in depression and contemplating suicide because they're so broken on the inside and they don't have anywhere to turn.
You know, psychologists I've spoken with in the past, they say when people talk about suicide all the time, those aren't the ones you should be concerned about. It's the ones who are quiet and you don't hear from.
That's true. And oftentimes psychologists label people who go through depression, suicide as a mental state, or it's a mental problem. And I personally disagree. I believe it is more of a spiritual problem before it becomes a mental and emotional problem. And until we address the spiritual issues that actually forms our thought process, and our thoughts form our emotions. And if we don't go down to the foundation of our spiritual condition, we will not be able to provide solutions for people who are suffering from depression.
Now, Tamara, you actually shot yourself. Where did you shoot yourself?
I did. I wanted Hal to definitely accomplish my goal. There was no turning back for me. I was in such a state of hopelessness and despair. I was so empty. I could not imagine living life any longer with the pain and agony I felt. And so I took a .38 caliber gun and I placed it at my heart. And that .38 caliber gun missed my heart less than 1/4 of an inch.
Wow.
Say that it is an absolute miracle. They have no idea why I am alive and survived it.
Now, you actually saw heaven and hell?
I did, Hal. I actually, when I took that .38 caliber gun and placed it at my chest and the gun went off, I experienced becoming blind and becoming deaf. And my soul left my body and I began traveling faster than the speed of light. And I began falling and falling and falling. And I landed in this place. It was hell. And many people doubt that the place exists, but I am here to testify that it is a very real place. And it is a place of torment that you cannot explain. The emotional pain that I was in is not even a speck of sand compared to the torment that is in that place. It is horrific. There are no words to describe the suffering. It was every molecule of my being was being tortured. It was like an acidic burn that was being poured all over my head from the inside out and the outside in. And all you could do was scream in agony and in being tortured.
Now, you also got a glimpse of heaven as well. And did you see Jesus?
That's the biggest question everyone always asks me is, did I see Jesus? You know, when you are outside of your body, the veil of the physical world is ripped off. And my knowledge was made complete. I knew who God was. I knew that Jesus Christ was the King. I knew from that point on that everything that I was experiencing was because of the absence of his presence. I could look out across the great divide and I could see heaven. I could see all of heaven and I could see the Lord upon the throne, but I was not allowed to see things in detail. And I was crying out and screaming out in agony for the Lord to send somebody back to earth to tell them the truth. And everybody around me, there were people all through hell that you could see as far as the eye would take you that were screaming out in the same capacity. And the only thing that mattered was that Jesus Christ was Lord. I knew every sin that they had committed. I knew their lineage. I knew where they were from. Every knowledge, all I had to do was think a thought, and my knowledge was made full. And so when I could look out again across and I could see the heavens, I knew that the very presence of God himself was what my heart was longing for. And I cried out for that and begged God to forgive me.
So Tamara, when you took that gun, put it to your chest, pulled the trigger, your mother found you? What happened when she did?
She did. She came in and she found me, and it was no mother should ever have to go through. It was horrific for her. And when she found me, she called the ambulance, and when they got there, they were like, "Are you even going to bother to take her to the hospital?" Because I was gray with the pallor of death. But what they didn't know was that I had left hell. God had actually picked me up when I was there, took me across the heavens, and had brought me back. And so now I was alive, and I was filled with hope because I knew the truth. And my mom was absolutely devastated, and I was reassuring her that everything is going to be okay. And she was like, "No, you're dying." And I was like, "No, I'm okay," because I knew I had already experienced death and had been given a second chance to live.
Wow. Now, you write in your book, A Second Chance at Heaven, that there was nothing unusual about the day you finally decided to kill yourself. What led to that decision finally? Was it the depression? No escape?
It was the no escape. It was the reality that no matter what I do, no matter what I try, the void on the inside of me will not go away. I cannot fill this void because I didn't understand that it's a relationship with God. It's this presence of the Holy Spirit that actually fills that void. And I knew God existed, but I didn't have that relationship. I didn't surrender my heart to his lordship. And I didn't understand it's the pursuit of righteousness that fills that void. And so being desperate, I had decided that I don't know what will fill this void, and I cannot live life this empty, this broken, and in torment forever.
Now, you say that your father never totally rejected you, but his actions left a distinct impression. How so?
Well, he was busy. You know, he was a father of 6 children, and he was at work. He was a workaholic. He worked all the time. I lived in a different city. And when I was around him, it was all about work. It was all about the other kids. It was all about his schedule. And I never felt like I belonged. I always felt like a stranger in my own house because of that lack of connection that I had with my father and with the rest of my family.
Now, there are many young people who feel overwhelmed by the circumstances of life, Tamara. Why do some people find ways to cope with it while others struggle? What do you think?
I believe it's the spiritual foundation that each individual has. Where they know where to turn to, when they know that God not only listens, but he definitely answers prayer. I believe it's having people that are encouraging you to follow after righteousness. And people who do not have that end up going down a farther, darker end because they don't have the answer. And the answer isn't, oh, just go to church, learn about God. The answer is get on your knees and develop a relationship with God. And I believe those who are able to overcome depression, overcome suicidal thoughts, are those who understand how to take the word and renew their mind and become transformed by the power of God's word.
Recent statistics say that suicide is up among women in North America. Why do you believe it's increasing?
I believe there's several factors that are involved in why it is increasing. I believe we're having an identity crisis. Women don't know where to find their identity. When you have pornography on a rise, you have drug addiction on a rise, you have sexual abuse on a rise in astronomical numbers. Women are looking at Hollywood. They think that they're supposed to be sex symbols. They find their identity through a career and through a job. And through these misconcepts, these false perceptions, they don't know that their identity is found in Christ. It's found in their Creator. And I believe that causes a deep depression because they don't have a sense of belonging, a sense of value. And when you realize the love that God has for you, the value that you have in God, it completely changes your perception.
Now, as you look back, is there anything your mom or friends could have done differently to prevent you from taking the action that you did?
I don't believe so because, as I was saying earlier, my problem was more spiritual than before it was mental and emotional. And until I took full responsibility of who and what I choose to become, the choice is mine, life and death. And until I chose life, I was suffering on the inside. And there is no relationship, there is no human being that can meet my spiritual needs. It only comes through the Holy Spirit and through Christ. And so I can't expect other people to fulfill the need that only God can fill.
Tamara, let me ask you something. Do you have children yourself? And if so, how old are they?
I do. I do. I have 3 children. I have a grown son who's in his early 30s, and I have 2 teenage girls.
There you go. So what message would you give to your teenage girls so they don't take the same path that you took?
I encourage them that they are loved, to know how much they are loved, not only by me, not only by the words of the people around them, but by who their Creator is. I teach them value, and I teach them to follow the words of truth and righteousness and not what people say.
How does a person's belief system really impact their quality of life?
I think it makes a complete difference. Their quality of life, whether you choose life or you choose death, you choose poverty, whatever you're choosing in life determines your thought process. And when you are a Christ follower and you believe his promises, you believe that he has promised to have goodness for you laid out. It doesn't mean we're not going to go through difficult situations. It doesn't mean we're not going to go through trials and through problems, but those promises are real. And when you believe in those promises, then you have hope. You have your answer. You know that no matter what you're facing, goodness is on the other side. And when you don't have that source, you don't have anything solid to stand on.
When you tried to take your own life, did you notice that people treated you differently, maybe kept their distance, or were they more supportive?
Absolutely, we're not more supportive. The stigma of suicide stuck with me for a really long time, even today, because I am so vocal upon it. But I know the truth, and knowing the truth truly sets you free. And I don't live by the opinion of men. I live to the audience of one. And knowing that it is my goal is to please my Heavenly Father, is to please my Lord and Savior, gives me the confidence to go forward. It gives me the ability to look past people's judgment and look at them from compassion because they don't understand. And those that have walked this journey understand. And so it opens up an opportunity for me to share how to overcome on a every basic day-to-day level, overcoming the problems of life. And being able to take the word and apply it in a realistic sense and not it be some fairy tale, but that it's real.
Now, the name of your book is called A Second Chance at Heaven. You say we all need second chances, Tamara. What would you say to a person struggling with self-esteem or a sense of hopelessness?
I would tell them that there is an answer. And the answer is found in not knowing that God is real, but surrendering your heart to his lordship, picking up the word and finding every promise that God has made to you and believing in it, believing that it is for you, believing that you're loved, because there is a solution to every problem that you are going through. And there are greener pastures on the other side.
And what advice would you give to parents who have teenagers who may also have suicidal tendencies or thoughts?
I would encourage them to lead their children in having a relationship with God, teaching them to go to the scriptures, studying the scriptures, reading the book of Proverbs, reading Psalms, reading those scriptures that tell us how to live life, give us the instructions of life, showing us how to love, and being able to open our hearts to receive God's love and instructing their children in the ways of righteousness, because that is truly where the answers are found, is in following after righteousness.
Tamara LaRue is the author of A Second Chance at Heaven. Thanks for joining me today via Skype from Houston, Texas.
Thank you.
Many are familiar with the Vineyard Church movement. Today's guest had the opportunity to travel and minister with the founder of Vineyard, the late John Wimber. Glenn Schroeder is the regional coordinator for Vineyard Missions USA in Mexico and Central America. Glenn also pastors Cascade Vineyard Church in Portland, Oregon. He's also the author of Never Trust a Leader Without a Limp. the wit and wisdom of John Wimber, founder of the Vineyard Church movement. Welcome to BCN, Glenn.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
And aloha, I guess you're joining us from Hawaii, right?
That is correct. We're here to celebrate our anniversary. I'm on vacation in Hawaii today.
That's beautiful. Never trust a leader without a limp. I gotta love the title of the book. That's hilarious. How did you come up with that?
I didn't come up with that. Actually, John did. Every chapter in the book is based on these little sayings that John had that were ways of communicating either theological or sort of philosophy of ministry truth. And never trust a leader without a limp was one of those. It was something he said to indicate that leadership is a hard road, and sometimes those hard knocks really shape us and form us and make us into the people we become in the Lord.
So what was it like really traveling with John Wimber, the founder of the Vineyard Church?
Well, it's interesting because we were very young at the time, and it was kind of, at that time, it seemed normal. We were just doing what we thought we were supposed to be doing. And he had really a very strong emphasis on releasing ministry and letting other people do ministry. So there was a team of us that went along with him on a number of different trips, and it was really fun. Years later, looking back, was talking to one of my friends that was on some of those trips, and he made the statement, I wish we'd have paid more attention, because at the time it seemed very normal. We just felt like we were doing what God had called us and led us to do.
Glenn, there's a lot of talk lately about whether God uses flawed leaders to accomplish his purpose and will. What's your take on that issue?
I think we're all flawed leaders. And I think that we have a couple of options. One is to allow those things to disqualify us and take us out of the game, or to allow those things to strengthen us and make us stronger and better leaders.
Now, recent studies show that Christians are not sharing their faith enough and that the number of unchurched people is actually growing. What do you make of these kinds of trends?
It's an interesting trend. I was talking to somebody recently about not only that trend in general, but that trend specifically among young people today, the millennial generation. We found that in our church in specific and in the Vineyard movement as a whole, that it's very attractive to young people if we have a very authentic style of faith that's not critical, judgmental, but embracing, welcoming, and like I said, authentic.
Now, can you share the story of how John Wimber, the leader of the Vineyard movement, came to know Christ?
I can. John was a musician, a professional musician, who worked with a band called the Paramours, who later became the Righteous Brothers. And he was, his wife and a group of people friends of his in Yorba Linda, California, were attending a small Bible study after their church service. And John was touring and traveling at the time, not part of the group. And he showed up at the group one night. And then there's a gentleman there named Gunnar Payne, who was an oil field worker, completely different reality, different background than John, and just began to share his faith very, again, authentically. And so John came to Christ.
Now, John Wimber's book, Power Evangelism, changed the way American evangelicals pray, gather, and really reach out. Why do you think it was so influential?
I think it was influential because it incorporated everybody into the game. An evangelist was no longer a person on a stage. It was no longer a big name, God's man of the hour person. It was every believer in every pew in every church in America.
You know, Glenn, I'm told that every Vineyard church has an ashtray out front of the building. Are there still that many smokers in the world? What's going on there?
I've heard that, but I've not seen that. I think some may. We do not. I don't know how many smokers there are. I think, if anything, it would be an indication that you're welcome here regardless.
Now, you chatted a bit earlier about John's musical influences. You know, he was a musician. To what extent did Wimber's background in the music industry influence the way Christian worship music has changed?
I think it was significant because today worship music is, contemporary, what we know of as contemporary worship is very popular. In the 70s, the late 70s, early 80s, when Vineyard was just beginning, there wasn't much like it out there. And it was really revolutionary to do worship in the style of contemporary music that Vineyard was doing at that time.
So 80s would be considered contemporary? The reason I'm asking that is my senior producer always gives me a rough time that even my worship music's from the 80s. So it's still cool. Is it still okay?
It was contemporary then. If we play 80s today, we're outdated.
Now, you write about some of the so-called Wimberisms. What are they exactly?
Wimberisms, again, were these little statements that John would use to describe either theological truth or philosophy of ministry. Things like the meat's in the street. And that came from a conversation he had. A woman came up to him following a service and said, "Hey, when are we going to get into the meat of the word?" And John said, "Well, the meat's in the street," meaning that the meat of the word is when you do the word. And so there are any number of sayings, and I've taken the time to write as many as I could remember down in my book and write a little bit about each one.
Glenn, tell me more about the term "everyone gets to play."
Oh, absolutely. That's one of my favorites. Everyone gets to play was, again, a philosophical statement that the ministry of the kingdom of God is not restricted to professionals. It's not restricted to pastors or elders. It's really a statement that says that every single believer has a valid contribution to make to the kingdom of God, and everyone can be involved in ministry.
Why do you say the pastoral ministry is not very easy, especially today?
I think it's a lot of fun, but it's a challenge because, again, what you said earlier, there's a lot of presupposition of people outside the church about what the church thinks about them. And so you have to push past some of those things and make people realize that God is a loving God and we are loving people, and we want to welcome them in and not just be critical and judgmental of them. I think when you can get past some of those barriers that have been erected over time, we really come to a place where we realize, hey, this is a valid thing to do.
So, Glenn, what did John Wimber say to you when you once opened up about your own personal struggles?
So that's a great story. Before I was on staff with John, I was a gardener in and around Orange County. John was one of my clients. And I showed up at his house one day to do the lawn. He came out to talk to me, and I was going through a tough time. I was probably about 21 or 22 years old at the time. And, he said, "How you doing?" And I kind of cried the blues a little, said, "Hey, John, I'm having kind of a hard day, a hard week, whatever." And he said, "Well, you're doing the right thing." And I said, "I am?" He said, "Yeah, you're doing the right thing." He goes, "When you feel like that, what you want to do is stay in bed and pull the covers over your head and just hide all day. But what you need to do is get up, get out, put your shoes and socks on, go to work, and pray. Pray until that lifts off of you." And I tell you, it changed everything for me. And I did exactly what he said. I was mowing the lawn and praying at the same time. By the end of the day, I think things had changed significantly for me.
That's great. Now, you're right about the rabbinic model of discipleship. What does that mean?
That means that it's really a show and tell kind of model. John really believed that discipleship was transferred through life, and so it's sort of like he would invite somebody to come along with him and watch him do ministry, and then he would invite them into the process, and they would minister with him, and then he would say, "Okay, now you do it," and then he would watch. And so it was really just a transference of authority, a transference of ministry through a sort of a show and tell or rabbinic model. And really, John trained, I don't know, hundreds of people to do ministry in that way.
You say, Glenn, being in a grace-filled community was the way in and the way on. How so?
Yeah. So again, I think sometimes there's this idea that, especially today, okay, we talked about the current situation in the Church of America today. I have to get my life together. I have to get things straight, and then I can go to church. Then I can come to God. John's idea was, no, just come as you are. Come on in, and let's work on those things together. And so that was sort of the way in is the way on. And we were accepted and received with grace, and then we continued on in that same path. And then I think ultimately used that to welcome others in along the way.
Hey, Glenn, a lot of times your pastors say, just come as you are. Flip-flops, jeans, ripped jeans, whatever, doesn't really matter. But then there are other people, more traditionalists that say, no, you should really put on your Sunday best and show respect to God when you go to church. What are your thoughts?
I understand that completely. So come as you are was a statement that John used that many people think describes just come as you are in terms of your dress. But it really was a deeper statement of come as you are in regards to the condition of your heart. Where are you at in life? And come to the Lord that way and let him work together on where that goes from here. As far as clothing, vineyard churches today tend to be very casual. And it's not necessary for us to put on our best. I think in our mind, in our heart, it's really putting your best in your heart. What's in here, putting that forward more than what's on the outside.
Okay, let's talk more, Glenn, about the core DNA that is part of the Vineyard movement.
Well, that's a big question. I think there are a number of issues. Really, my book is about the DNA of the Vineyard. Every chapter is a little bit about who we are as a people and what defines us. I've tell our congregation and those I get a chance to talk to, we're not the best church in town, we're not the only church in town, but this is who we are. And so I think part of our DNA is that authenticity, that ability to come where we are today and to move forward together with the Lord. And it's a humility that allows us to enter into a place of worship that, in my mind, is very, very genuine and very real.
Why do you think so many young people today find a home in Vineyard churches?
Well, for one thing, everything I just said, plus the fact that we make an opportunity for them to make a valid and vital contribution. You don't have to get older to be involved in a Vineyard church. I've told people my church today, my associate pastor is 27 years old. There's only one person on my worship team over the age of 30, and one of our worship leaders is 18. And so we make a place for them, and they know that their contribution counts. And that was really something that came from John. I was 19 when I started attending the Vineyard, and my wife was a little bit younger than me. And we really found that we were active and involved and engaged from the very beginning, regardless of how old we were.
Glenn, how can we make church more relevant in today's society?
That's a great question. I think one is opening the door to younger people. I think speaking a language that they can understand and being willing to embrace people where they are, and with a loving and an acceptance and a welcoming that's not critical or judgmental. I think there's nothing more relevant than the church in my mind to where we are as a world today. There's so much division, so much isolation. And church is community. It's not division. It's connection. And I think those things, speaking those things loud and clear, will draw people's hearts into, a relationship with the Lord.
And our young people are the leaders of tomorrow, so love them where they're at, I guess, right?
I think they're the leaders today.
What do you hope readers will really take away from reading your book?
I really hope that they take away an understanding that the Vineyard movement, John in specific, and really the kingdom of God is a place where everybody really does get to play, and where everybody can make a contribution, and where humility and authenticity are greater values than maybe some of the other values that they've had put forth in other contexts.
Glenn Schroeder, author of Never Trust a Leader Without a Limp, The Wit and Wisdom of John Wimber, founder of the Vineyard Church Movement. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Maui, Hawaii.
Thank you so much for having me on. Aloha.
Teenagers are often frustrated with their parents for the rules they need to follow, and parents get frustrated sometimes with their kids not following the rules. Well, today's guest is 20 years of age, used to be a teenager not that long ago, and has some helpful advice on how to smooth out some of the wrinkles. Lissy Reno is the author of the book, The Heart of Your Teen, an insider look at the parent-teen relationship. Lissy, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks, Hal. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Now, I like that, an insider look at the parent-teen relationship. Lissy, explain what motivated you to write the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually come from a big family, so I'm one of 7 kids, and my parents lead a ministry called Visionary Family. And so after high school, I actually took a gap year, and I spent half the year at home working with my parents and working with their ministry. And it was really during that time that God really just put this passion on my heart for reaching out to teenagers and helping encourage teenagers in their family relationships. Because no matter what kind of family you have, family relationships are hard for everyone. And no matter what kind of phase of life you're at, and especially during the teen years. And so I kind of began on this journey of helping teenagers kind of look into their family relationships and ask the question, so what does it mean to live for Christ first at home with our families and then everywhere else? And so I began speaking to some youth groups and some churches, and that's when I got connected with a publishing company here in Nashville called Randall House. And Randall House had published a couple of my parents' books, and they reached out to me and they said, hey, Lissy, we'd be really interested in you doing a book project with us, but we don't want you to write a book for teenagers. We want you to write a book for parents on how to have a better relationship with their middle school, high school age child. And at first, I was not excited about the idea at all. I was like, I'm not a parent. I'm not an expert on parenting. I was like, maybe I could write a page about this, but there's no way it could be a whole book. But my parents really encouraged me, and they were like, okay, Lissy, if God is opening up this door for you, then walk through it and see what happens.
So what are some of the biggest misunderstandings parents have about their teenagers besides defining what a clean bedroom should really look like?
Right. So the best part of this whole project actually was I got to interview teenagers from across the country and ask the question, so what did your parents do really well while you were in high school to help build a relationship with you? And what's one thing that you wish they had done differently? And some of the answers that I received absolutely blew me away. And that's what got me really excited about this book. And some of the things that teenagers said were like, I really wish that my parents would ask me more intentional questions about my life. I really wish they taught me more accountability with my technology and my social media. I really wish my parents would pray more with us as a family or read the Bible more with us as a family. And those answers were like across the board. And so as I started talking to more people and getting those responses, I was like, wow, this could be an incredible message for parents to hear from their teenagers about what they want in that relationship.
Now, you write that when parents give advice and instruction to their kids, sometimes it can maybe backfire a little bit unless it's done in a relational basis. Can you explain?
Yeah, absolutely. So really the whole premise of the heart of your teen is that this idea that relationship has to come before discipleship. So before parents could try and have a discipleship relationship with their child, there has to be the foundation of a loving relationship first. And so the first chapter of the book talks all about how parents can build the foundation of that relationship. And what the book calls it, I talk about what having a heart-connected relationship looks like. So a heart connection relationship is one that's full of openness, honesty, trust, and love. So it talks a lot to parents about, okay, what's a great way that you can spend quality time with your teenager? Speak words of affirmation to your teenager. Have fun with them. Pursue their interests, engage in what they love to do and help build the foundation of that relationship.
So how can you create a relationship that is a safe place for your teenager to talk about some key or controversial issues?
Mm-hmm. So I talk about that a lot in a chapter that I write, and really it's kind of a two-part issue. In talking to teenagers, I found that a lot of parents tend to be kind of on the extremes of certain things. So you have parents that are filled with a lot of grace for their kids, to the point where maybe they're not pointing out certain issues that they might have. And then you have a lot of parents that maybe are full of a lot of truth, but don't have a lot of grace. And so what I've found and what's been really helpful in my personal relationship with my parents is that there has to be that combination of grace and truth that pair together. So parents that, some things that my parents would tell me that really helped me in high school were, Lissy, we're committed to you. We love you. No matter what mistakes you make, no matter what you do in your life, we are always going to be committed to you in love. But they would also tell me some things that were really hard to hear sometimes and speak truth into my life where I needed to hear truth. So I really think that one of the most important aspects of having those difficult conversations is to have both the grace and the truth present.
Now, when it comes to parenting, discipline is also a big part of the relationship as well. I remember when my son was really young, really little, he hated, being put into the corner, staring at the walls when he did something he shouldn't do. It's like, this is driving me crazy. Please stop. I'm not going to do that ever again, right? Can you talk a bit about discipline versus the need for affirmation and encouragement?
Absolutely. So one thing that I noticed in talking with teenagers is that a lot of them talked about how when they were little, their parents gave more direct consequences. So you do something wrong, you get a consequence. But as they kind of grow up and as we kind of become teenagers, the consequences decrease while the lectures increase. And oftentimes those lectures can be filled with a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness, a lot of annoyance, sometimes on both sides for the parent and for the teenager. And so something that a lot of kids said that as I was talking to them, they're like, I think that if my parents gave me a direct consequence, that would actually preserve our relationship more. because those lectures, all that it's doing is pulling the hearts of teenagers and parents away from each other. Because when that anger gets in, when that bitterness gets in, when that defiance enters in, I think that that can be the real problem. And so for me and my parents, a lot of times if they gave me a direct consequence, it actually preserved our relationship better than them, acting out of anger or giving me this long conversation.
Like a reactive reaction, knee-jerk reaction. How can parents effectively get their teens to take their faith seriously and really make it their own?
Yeah, well, I think that I've seen, just as I've been growing up and kind of diving into this topic more, and like I said, how I am not an expert on parenting. I am not a parent myself, so all I can really give is sort of just my observations of what I've seen and what's been really helpful for me. But something that impacted me the most as a teenager and as I've been kind of becoming more independent and making my faith my own is just, first of all, my parents communicating their commitment to me. That was huge. The next would be seeing the faith of my parents active in their own lives. When I come down in the morning to see my dad at the breakfast table with his Bible open and doing his devotions, or my mom sharing with me about how her faith is impacting her personal life. And then also my parents just being willing to allow me to make some decisions about my faith, to press into the fact, it's okay to have doubts sometimes. It's okay to question what you believe. It's actually a good thing to be able to wrestle through those feelings and decide for yourself what you believe. But something that my parents did that was so helpful was just they always communicated that if I was having those feelings or if I was having doubts, they were the safest people in the world for me to talk to about those things. And I could come to them with anything that I was feeling, and they would listen and be able to help me sift through that.
It's not uncommon for a teenager today to say to their parents, I'm not going to church anymore. That's it. I'm done. I'm out. How should parents really handle a situation like that?
I think that's really tough. And I also think it depends on the age of your child. Now, if the child is in middle school, if I were a parent, I would say, okay, if we're paying for your life, if you're living under our roof, you're going to come to church with us because that's what our family does. Now, maybe your teenager is in college and independent and they're not wanting to go to church. Well, at that point, I don't know how much of the parents can force the child to do something, because at that point, you don't want to force your child to be a Christian or to actively live out their faith. It has to be a choice that they make for themselves. So I think a lot of it has to do with parents kind of offering that encouragement, again, offering that commitment, and going back to the base of that relationship. Because, if you have a healthy relational base with your teenager or with your child, no matter what age you are, it's going to be so much easier to have those types of conversations about faith and about church and all of that.
A lot of parents want respect from their teenagers, and I guess teens also want respect from mom and dad too. What needs to happen in order for mutual respect to be there?
During my senior year of high school, God really just convicted me on exactly that issue. And I think it really has to do with the fifth commandment, the call to honor your father and mother. Because for a long time, growing up in my house, and my dad's a pastor, and I was always the good kid on the outside, like, all my teachers and all my friends would always be like, "Oh, Lissy, you're so great, you're so mature, you're so wise." But at home, my parents would be like, "Okay, Lissy, you were rude to your sister yesterday. We see you being a little selfish in these areas. We think you need to work on this, this, and this." And really, I think where God really convicted me the most was that, yes, I was obedient to my parents. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't going out and doing all these things. But the attitude of my heart was one of defiance and bitterness and selfishness. And so it's that piece of what is obedience versus honor, because honor starts in the heart and obedience overflows from that. But if I was having just the actions on the outside that were making me a good kid, but my heart was full of dishonor towards my parents. And so I think that that's something for parents who, even if they have kids that are really young, to be able to start discipling that, because, my parents could tell. If they told me to do something and I obeyed them but had a terrible attitude about it, they knew. And so I think parents can really start seeing that in their kids and start helping them disciple them in those areas.
Now let's talk a bit about social media and technology. What kinds of boundaries should parents be putting in place?
Well, how that is really a hard issue, because social media and technology it's everywhere for teenagers, and it's how we communicate, and it's just so ingrained in our lives. But what I talk about in the book, and there's a chapter on technology, is that really the key ingredient in our home was accountability. Because, as parents, you are never going to be able to keep absolutely all the junk outside of your child's life at all times. I mean, it's just impossible in the world that we live in. But in our house, we had to create this culture of accountability. And so when I got my phone, when I got my social media, my parents really communicated to me that, Lissy, your phone is not your private information. Like, we have the right to look at your phone at any time that we want. And even my dad, he would be like, look, Lissy, I don't even think that I'm above accountability. I have accountability partners, and I have, these internet blocking services. And so we want to work together to create an accountability atmosphere in our home, because, that we have this saying that no one is holy enough for a secret online life, whether you're a middle schooler or an adult.
Now, we should also probably talk a bit about dating and the challenges of remaining pure in a sex-saturated world, Lissy. What advice do you have for parents and teenagers when it comes to sex?
I mean, that is a really tough question. And again, I think that it all goes back to that piece of the heart-connected relationship that you have with your child. And so I remember when I was in 8th grade, I think I had a crush on a boy at school. And I just really felt this urge that I needed to be sharing those feelings that I was having with my dad, or just get some advice from him and talk to him. And I just remember having this pit in the bottom of my stomach. It was the last thing in the world that I wanted to do. It just absolutely made me sick. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I have a great relationship with my dad. I love my dad. I know my dad loves me. Why am I so afraid to talk to him about these things? And really, I have come to really believe that that was spiritual attack coming against the relationship that I had with my dad. And so I think so much of that, dealing with relationships and sex and dating and all of that, is, if kids feel like their parents are safe people to talk to, then, that's a win. That is a win for that relationship, because what the world is going to say is, to teenagers, is you should talk to everyone else. You should talk to your friends. You should talk to your mentors. You should talk to your youth group leaders. But the last person in the world to talk to is your parents, because there's that fear, that shame and embarrassment. And so I think if parents can really work through that and help build the relationship of trust and openness, that would be so helpful in navigating all of those relationships.
Lissy Reno is the author of Heart of Your Teen, an insider look at the parent-teen relationship. Thanks a lot for joining us today from Nashville, Tennessee.
Thanks for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.